working? Yes. Well, good morning, everyone, and I want to welcome everyone in putting time out of their busy morning to be with us today with such an important subject. I am chairwoman of the Phoenix City Council Community and Cultural Investment Subcommittee, Councilwoman Betty Guardado, and I understand the vital role water plays in our desert environment. We must carefully preserve this vital resource and use it wisely. Sustainability is a foundation of growth in Phoenix, and planning for water for our future has always been our priority. Deteriorating conditions on the Colorado River has further accelerated Phoenix's planning for resiliency in water resources. That is why, as chair of the subcommittee, I thought it was important to pull together the panel we have here today to have experts from across the field show how we can all do our part to mitigate the impacts of the Colorado River shortage and drought in our cities as much as possible. While we are living with the impacts of drought and climate change now, how we handle them and the decisions we make will impact our children and their future. I want to thank the panel for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us today, and I look forward to a robust discussion. And now I also would like to hand it over to our mayor, Kate Gallego.
Thank you, Councilwoman Guardado. You're a big reason why we are here today, and appreciate your leadership on sustainability issues. I want to welcome our very distinguished panel, including one guest who has traveled with us to be here today. We really are very lucky that we get to hear from the who's who, the real experts in this field. I want to do a special welcome to Councilwoman Deborah Stark, who has joined us today, as well as to my council colleagues, many of whom are watching online. It turns out YouTube is now the top information source for water information at the City of Phoenix, and we just want to thank everyone who is joining us online to learn about this very important topic. I want to thank Karen Peters, Cynthia Campbell, Troy Hayes, and the entire team at the Water Department who are making sure we are well positioned in this area and who have worked to convene this all-star panel. We really want to thank you for what you do for our city every day. More than 40 million people rely on the Colorado River, most of them through a municipal water utility. Municipal water users account for roughly 15% of Colorado River use in the basin. Industries crucial to national security, including aerospace, chip manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices, are in Phoenix and cities across the West. Phoenix is adapting the way we operate and grow to live in better harmony with our desert environment. We've reduced our per capita water use by 30% over the last 30 years, even with an increase in population of over 400,000 people. In the 1970s, over 80% of the Phoenix residential properties were landscaped with majority turf. Today, that number is less than 10%. We're building upon existing conservation programs to develop a new sustainable desert development policy that Councilwoman Guardado and Councilwoman Stark are very involved with. It's creating a framework for working with large users to mitigate their water use. We're looking at requiring new residential developments to achieve EPA WaterSense or equivalent certification. We're very hopeful that will help, particularly with outdoor water use. We're considering our annexation policy, where we add new property to the City of Phoenix when we don't have the water supply that makes sense for us. It's crucial that cities develop new strategies for smart, sustainable growth, building upon a trend of decreasing per capita use. One example of public-private collaboration is the City of Phoenix's work with the New Venture Fund's Blue Commons Project and Bonneville Environmental Foundation's Business for Water Stewardship. This allows us to work with commercial and industrial stakeholders in dramatically reducing water consumption. It was inspired by a very successful program we had with Phoenix Sky Harbor and their cooling towers, which saves 30 million gallons of water per year, was saving us money, a great win for both the airport customers and water conservation. Donors can invest in the fund and receive conservation credits. We're exploring opportunities to expand this mechanism to promote other types of conservation. We're also very excited about water recycling as one of the most significant opportunities to bolster our water security. We're laying the groundwork for advanced water for purification and are working with neighboring cities to examine the potential for a regional facility. We're very excited for the partnership with the federal government in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's new resources in the West, and we're very hopeful that cities will be able to take advantage of that to do our part. Last week, I got to join Bureau of Reclamation leadership and climate mayors to discuss funding opportunities for cities. We really want to capitalize on those opportunities to invest in long-term solutions, not one-time, short-term fixes. This month, we joined more than 30 water providers throughout the basin in signing an MOU for a shared conservation commitment. The MOU will help us facilitate regional communication and collaboration between cities. It's about more than pulling out grass and replacing fixtures. It reflects our commitment to innovative new solutions and to rethink the way we grow and operate. And I want to thank Southern Nevada Water Authority for your leadership in bringing us all together. Because changes in municipal use of Colorado River supplies won't solve the supply-demand imbalance in the basin, the best investments in municipal conservation are ones that increase the resiliency of cities by reducing their dependence on any single supply. Just as we are rethinking how we manage water, we hope other sectors will demonstrate the same commitment. Agriculture, which uses 70% of the Colorado River water, must consider what they can do in our new reality. We want to thank everyone for their leadership on the issue and for the residents who are engaging with us. One of the really great points of optimism for me is that the questions about water and the interest in our residents is continuously increasing. I feel like we have the political will to do the important work that we need to meet the challenge in the Colorado River Basin and so much further. Thank you all for the gift of your time, and again, thank you to our amazing panelists for the gift of your expertise. And now I'll bring back Councilwoman Guardado.
Thank you, Mayor. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for this morning, our Water Resources Management Advisor, Cynthia Campbell. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I appreciate the introduction. I want to take a couple minutes to introduce our very esteemed panel who were very kind to share their time with us this morning. First of all, we'll start with Mr. Terry Goddard, immediately to my left. Terry Goddard is the president of the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. That is the entity that operates the Central Arizona Project. He was elected to his second full term on the CAWCD board in 2018 and represents Maricopa County through 2024. He is currently serving as the president of the board, and he is an attorney with the Goddard Law Office. He also served as Mayor Phoenix from 1984 through 1990 and was the Arizona Attorney General from 2003 through 2011. And thank Mr. Goddard for being here, please. Our next panelist is Grady Gamage Jr., who is a senior research fellow at the Kyle Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute, and so much more. He is describes himself as a part-time academic, a practicing lawyer, an author, a sometime real estate developer, and former elected official. He is, as I've said, the senior fellow at the ASU's Kyle Center for Water Policy at Morrison Institute, where his work focuses on urban growth and development, quality of life, and local economic issues. He also teaches at Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law and at the W.P. Carey School of Business. As a lawyer, he's represented real estate projects ranging from master planned communities to sprawling subdivisions to high-rise buildings. And he also served on the Central Arizona Project Board of Directors for 12 years. And he has an author on growth and development, and we thank him for being here today. Warren Tenney is the executive director of the Arizona Municipal Water Providers Association, the Water Users Association. Those members of AMWA, as we call it, include 10 major municipalities in the valley, including Phoenix as a founding member, and currently serve 3.7 million people, more than half the state's population. Warren is a member of the Governor's Water Council and co-chair of the Council's post-2025 AMA Committee. He was elected twice to the Central Arizona Project Board of Directors representing Pima County. Thank you for being here today, Warren. Carol Ward is a Deputy Assistant Director at the Arizona Department of Water Resources. She oversees the department's statewide strategic planning, active management areas, groundwater permitting and wells, and surface water rights and permitting sections. That's pretty much a lot of it. Before joining the department, she worked for 23 years at AMWA. Her focus was on municipal conservation, demand management, and the sustainability side of water resource management. She is also a former officer of the Board of Directors of the Alliance for Water Efficiency, a nonprofit association advancing the efficient and sustainable use of water across North America. Thank you for being here today, Carol. Sarah Porter is the director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy at Arizona State University's Morrison Institute for Public Policy. The Kyle Center promotes research, analysis, collaboration, and dialogue to build consensus in support of sound water stewardship in Arizona and the West. Sarah came to the Kyle Center from the National Audubon Society, where she served as the Arizona State Director and led Audubon's Western Rivers Project, a multi-state initiative to protect and restore important river habitats in the Intermountain West. Sarah serves on Senator Sinema's Water Advisory Council, Governor Ducey's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council, the University of Arizona's Water Resources Research Center's External Advisory Council, and she serves for the City of Phoenix on our Environmental Quality and Sustainability Commission. Thank you for being here today, Sarah. And last, but certainly not least, is our out-of-town visitor and guest, J.C. Davis, who is the Enterprise Conservation Manager for the Southern Nevada Water Authority. He manages that division. He's an analyst and public relations professional for more than 25 years. During his tenure with Las Vegas's Regional Water Agency, he has developed numerous stakeholder relations and media outreach programs related to water conservation, water resources, environmental issues, water quality, rate structures, and infrastructure investment. He has also been kind of the spearhead for non-functional turf removal in Southern Nevada and is now moving more into the industrial area, where he's going to work on some of our their industrial customers in terms of their water use. And we thank him for coming to Phoenix today to join us. All right, so now we've got all the introductions out of the way. We're going to start really quickly with just a couple slides to give you an idea of where we are today on the Colorado River. And first you start with, where does Phoenix get its water? Because that kind of puts a lot of things in context, because the rest of the conversation we're going to have today is really focused on the Colorado River. But to understand the impact to Phoenix, you have to understand that 40% of our water comes from the Colorado River. More than the majority of our water comes from the Salt and Verde rivers, 58%, and groundwater contributes 2%. This is not a reflection of what the Phoenix water resource portfolio is, but rather how we use it. And what I mean by that is that we actually have more resources available than are reflected in this pie chart, including a large amount of groundwater. We consider groundwater to be a fossil supply that's finite, and we want to use it as a last resort. And so that's reflected in the 2% groundwater use that we do have. And just to talk really briefly about the Colorado River, right now, I always call the Colorado River a long-term drought with a dose of climate change. So we're looking in the driest conditions in over 1,200 years based upon the tree ring record. The major reservoirs in Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at historic low levels in the 25th percentile right now. What we're finding is that temperature, more than precipitation, is the driver for the decline in river flows in the Colorado River. And what I mean by that is that The soils in the Colorado Rockies are getting hotter. It's a process we call aridification. And so even though we're getting in the 90th percentile of what is normal precipitation, we are not getting that runoff into the river. We're getting more into the 50th percentile for runoff in the river, and that's resulting in low flows in the Colorado River. If those reservoirs that I mentioned drop to what we call dead pool levels, where the water cannot physically get out of the reservoir, it may be difficult to move water downstream through the dams. So what does that mean in practical sense? If water can't get past Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell, there'll be no water in the Grand Canyon. If water can't get out of Lake Mead past Hoover Dam, there'll be no water in the Central Arizona Project. And so these are very serious times right now that we're experiencing. Because of that, the Bureau of Reclamation has declared a Tier 2A shortage for the upcoming water year in 2023. But what's really more important than that is that the Bureau of Reclamation has told us publicly several times now that what the level of demand, that is how much water is being taken out of the river by all the folks who use it, needs to go down, needs to decrease by 2 to 4 million acre feet, and a Tier 2A shortage definitely does not do that. And so there are big cuts coming, and we have to figure out how to start living really more within the means of what this river will give us at this time. And so because of that, the city of Phoenix declared stage 1 of its drought mitigation plan back in June. And this forum, as well as other actions that we've done in town halls and in media coverage, are part of our effort to really educate the public on what is coming. It's not here today, but it is coming. And what is coming, what I mean by what's coming is we are going to see significant declines in Colorado River deliveries to Phoenix, as well as the other metro areas in central Arizona. And with that, I want to turn and start. Let's talk to these panelists who came so far away. So the forum is set up this way. Each question will be directed at 2 of the panelists in order to get through the maximum number of questions. But if other panelists have a comment on a question that was not addressed to you, you're more than welcome to chime in after the 2 panelists who answer the question are done. So we're going to start with our first question, which I am going to direct to Sarah Porter and Terry Goddard, and that is, cities in the West, including Phoenix, use approximately 15% of the Colorado River flows, while agriculture uses between 70 and 80% of Colorado River flows. The Bureau of Reclamation has indicated Colorado River water users must reduce their demand by 2 to 4 million acre feet in order to prevent a collapse of the system. What role can cities play in this effort, given the relatively small amount of water they use? I'll start ladies first. Sarah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I was going to defer to the CAWCD chair, but I'll dive in here. Cities can play an important role. One is that we're in an all-hands-on-deck situation, and so we don't get a pass from conserving because we live in cities, and cities use a smaller proportion of water than agriculture. It's important for all of us to conserve as we can, and we need to permanently reduce the amount of water that we're using, especially outside. When we do that, it helps our city. No matter what city you live in, it helps your city meet demand with the water supplies in hand. So that's one thing that as a person who lives in cities, that's what we urban dwellers need to do. The optics are also very important. There are highly difficult negotiations going on right now, and we can't expect other water-using sectors, and especially agriculture, to take all the pain. It's important that it be visible that everybody is working hard to conserve water. The other place where cities can play an important role is to invest in reduce water use by agriculture. When farmers have less water to put down on fields, they lose production. They take an economic hit, very different from many of the urban conservation impacts. And there are programs that are proof of concept in the basin where cities are helping to fund conservation on the part of agriculture. And cities have the capacity to do that. They have the mass of taxpayers and ratepayers who can help create funds to make those investments to help transition rural economies either to more efficient farming or to other types of economic activity that can help those rural economies stay resilient.
With that, we turn to President Goddard.
Hey, thank you. Well, I'd really like to thank Councilwoman Guardado for putting this forum together, and Cindy Campbell for moderating it, and the distinguished panel, especially Southern Nevada, coming to, we spend so much time occasionally in this area casting envious glances at Las Vegas and its surroundings, and it's nice to have them be the image leader at this moment, and we thank you for being here. This question has the danger of being a catch-all for sort of all the issues that we're talking about today, and I'll try to avoid that. But Sarah Porter has done a great job of starting the role that cities can play. I'd just like to emphasize a couple things. The first one is the excellent slides that we saw, I think, lay the groundwork that this is not a passing problem. I hate the use of the word drought these days because after 23 years, it really doesn't qualify as a drought. Something has changed. Something has changed in the patterns of the weather that we're getting, and that specifically, as you said, Ms. Campbell, is the aridification, a word I never heard before, but the aridness of the forests. The Colorado River gets its sustenance from the Rockies. And the Rockies these days are not only much warmer, but they have, as just been said, they have the same approximate precipitation, but it's not getting to Lake Powell. So same precipitation and much less flow into the lakes has made the problem we have today so intense. But it's also part of overconsumption. Between the two basins, we are growing rapidly in both areas, both the upper and the lower basin, and the demands are more and more intense every year. And it becomes very clear that in a time of shortage, we can't meet those demands. So what can cities do? I think many of the points have already been made. One is, and I hate to use the word optics, but Sarah's used it, so I can jump on. We are in very serious interstate negotiations right now, culminating in 2026 with a new agreement among the 7 basin states on the river. And right now, Arizona does not have the best reputation as a water-conserving environment. In fact, our, I don't call them enemies, but our fellow basin states make a point of showing the fountain in Fountain Hills or the 200 golf courses in Maricopa County or other areas that they proclaim are terribly wasteful of water. Whether they are or not is probably not the question. It, however, puts a negative spin on any requests we have to reallocate water within the basin. And reallocation or reprioritization is really the order of the day. Agriculture, as the question points out, uses 70% of the Colorado River water that comes to Arizona. I don't think we can face a future with equanimity that says that we would continue to farm alfalfa and not provide water for the cities for health and safety and for economic growth. So that's part of the reanalysis that I think has got to happen here in Arizona and throughout the Rocky Mountain West. But another big part of it is we've got to change our habits. We've got to change the way we do business. We've got to, for example, when we look at a new economic or employment opportunity, they ought to be rated on a scale of how conserving of water they are per job. That doesn't exist right now, but I think it has to in the future. You can't provide, and state of Arizona is still gleefully providing subsidies without regard of whether or not that industry is particularly water conserving. So there's one place the cities can go. One that I think will cause some consternation is I think cities in the immediate future are going to have to stop storing water. They can get water off the Colorado River for their immediate needs, but the other basin states literally are in anguish about the fact that cities, Tucson, Phoenix, and others are taking more than they're using and putting it underground. Now, for a long time, that was a very prudent method. That was something that served us very well, and there's about 10 million acre feet that is there for emergencies when we need it, and we're going to need it. But to continue to do that is a, let's say, poke in the eye to other folks who need water from the river. So we're going to have to change those habits too. But the biggest part is just making sure that we can be here in Phoenix and across the 3-county area that CAP serves, examples of conservation. And that means, the mayor referred to it, future planning that, in my humble opinion, I think should eliminate artificial lakes, should eliminate, I have a hard time describing the fountains, but when you pump the water up in the air and it doesn't come back down, you probably have a use of water that can't be sustained, and probably shouldn't be for symbolic reasons if nothing else. And we need to look very carefully at our use of lawns. I think we'll hear from Southern Nevada that they've been aggressive about turf reduction. That's a symbolic but also very important use, because 70% of our water is outdoors here in Maricopa County, and we got to find better ways to conserve our outdoor use. So those are a few things I think we need to do as cities and as citizens to do a better job in the future.
Thank you, President Goddard. I'm going to move right into the next question here. So in the last several years, the state of Arizona has focused on finding the next bucket of water, or a process we call augmentation. What opportunities for augmentation do you see on the horizon for central Arizona, and how long before this water is available? And I should have said at the beginning, this question is for Grady Gamage as well as Terry Goddard. Grady, you want to take a snap first?
Okay, I am troubled by the word augmentation because I don't think we are all talking about the same thing when we use that word. It is tempting to see any reshuffling of priorities, either within an agricultural sector, within a municipal sector, or between the two different sectors, as in some way augmentation. And I really don't think that it is. I really think augmentation means finding water that isn't coming into the systems as it currently exists. And so most of what I think we need to do, Terry's already talked about this, is not really augmentation, but is making different kinds of choices about how water is used. That, I think, can successfully get the economy of Arizona through the next 30 to 40 years. Augmentation to me means something beyond that. And I think we need to seriously begin planning and working on augmentation that is 30 and 40 years out in the future, because the shuffling that we can do for that 30 to 40 years isn't enough. Now, depending on what happens with the climate and so on, it may turn out that 40 years is really 60 years, or it may turn out to be a little less. I don't think it'll be markedly less. Robert Glennon had a piece, I think, in the Republic. He's a U of A professor. Yesterday, saying we should not be talking about desal. It's too expensive. It's pie in the sky. We should just be working on moving ag water to urban water and so on. That's what I'm calling shuffling. I do think we need to start talking about a long-term additional bucket of water, and I do think desal is the most likely of those. You hear about towing icebergs, not big on that. You hear about cloud seeding, maybe, I don't know. Seems to me likely to have a lot of unintended consequences. You hear about moving water from the Mississippi. Now, that used to seem like a good idea when the Mississippi had too much water. It doesn't anymore. It is now suffering as well, and I think that's unlikely. I think the one big thing that can be out there on the horizon is desal, either in California and an exchange, in Mexico an exchange, whatever it is. But I think we need to have that in the works in order to give ourselves and businesses and others who would relocate here comfort that the shuffling is taking care of things. for what is perceived as the immediate crisis. But there has to be something else out there on the horizon.
Well, let me try to pick up from the little bit, the few crumbs that Grady left on the table to talk about. One is our history. Central Arizona has had I think, remarkable history of water management. We've understood in our hearts that we live in a desert, that we need to have a sustainable and continuous supply to be able to live here. And that started back in the early 1900s with the Salt River Project, one of the first, if not the first, major reclamation project in the United States. And it continues, as you saw from the slide, to provide reliable surface water to Phoenix and to all of Central Arizona. That's really important. Well, that was a big deal. That was a big project at its time. Literally, the farmers in Central Arizona mortgaged their ranches and their farms to pay for the dams, to pay back the Bureau of Reclamation. And then we had the Central Arizona Project in 1968, which was another big deal that essentially made it possible to continue the growth of Central Arizona, which wouldn't have been possible if you just had the Salt River Project. And the expert on that is to my left, and I won't go any further because Grady has expounded on that very, very well. But it was another major step forward, 1.5 million acre feet per year of new supplies coming in to our community. And we're still paying it back, by the way. That's the three of us that either have served or currently serve on the CAP board know that there's a big mortgage that comes with the CAP. I think there's a tendency because of that to think, well, there's another big project out there. There's another SRP or CAP, give me an initial, and we'll figure that there's a way to sort of save us in the next century. And I really don't think there is. I think at this point we've had the two big ones. I've participated as a spectator in the hearings on the Central Arizona Project, and it was my father that had to testify before Congress that we had no plans to import water from any other watershed in the West. Now, is that binding legally? No, but it's certainly out there, and it will come back to haunt us if we ever try to pull water from the Columbia, the Willamette, or the Snake, or any of the other areas outside of our Colorado River watershed. So we need to look at what Grady has called the rearrangement, and the big rearranger is the Central Arizona Project. That's our money, that's our canal. It's like a river, but unlike other rivers, it runs uphill, not downhill. But it has much of the same impact. It has the ability, under the arrangements with the federal government, to move non-project water, non-Colorado River CAP water, to its destination. And we're now negotiating an agreement with the Salt River Project to allow an interchange between those two canal systems. That gives amazing flexibility to all of Central Arizona to move water around. And we have some water. Mo Udall had made the comment many years ago that we had plenty of water, it was just in the wrong places. He said that during a flood, so you can understand the impediment, but so much of that is true. We've stored a lot of water underground, but it's not where the users are, so we're gonna have to pull it back up and move it in the CAP canal to where it's needed. We have underground water in the three rural watersheds, McMullen, Harquahala, and Butler. We can move that, we have the right to move that at a cost through the CAP canal to other users. So those are other things, but those are not new augmentations to the supply. That's water we have right now. Raising the Salt River dams is another possibility. That provides some additional permanent supply. It's going to come back every year. But that's all here now. We just need to use what's here now better. And I'm a little more skeptical than Mr. Gamage on this, the being able to run a deal with a pipeline from Mexico into the United States and have a $5 or $6 billion operation. Actually, I think Glendenin said it would total $20 billion to get 200,000 acre feet out of the Sea of Cortez. That's a pretty high price. I would prefer, and this is another option on the table, that we continue the partnership that DWR and the CAP have forged with Metropolitan Water in Los Angeles to help them pay for their water purification, their direct potable recharge, which could produce, at a cost, approximately 200,000 acre feet of water, which is now being taken from the Colorado, but if they get it from their direct potable recharge, they'll be able to reduce what they take from Colorado River, and we would be able to absorb some of that. So those are options in the future. None of them are really augmentation except the last. They're looking for new ways to use what we've got better, more efficiently.
I'm going to shuffle these up a little bit. So during the last legislative session, the Arizona legislature committed to funding water projects with $1 billion over 3 years. A reconfigured Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, or WIFA, was recently charged as the entity responsible for making the investment decisions for this funding. One pool of funding is $200 million in WIFA funding for water conservation projects. And this question is directed to Carol and to JC. If you could advise the WIFA board, what would you consider the most promising water conservation projects that would benefit Phoenix? I'd like to take that.
So I wouldn't presume to advise the WIFA board, and honestly, the City of Phoenix staff probably know far better than I do what their best opportunities are. But I want to touch on landscape water use, because as we know, so much of municipal water use is actually the water that's used outdoors on our landscapes. And I want to make the point that Tucson, Phoenix, and Valley cities have been hands down leaders on addressing landscape water use, and particularly landscape conversion. The cities were launching programs to address this beginning in the 70s and the 80s. They worked to educate, to train, to develop resources and distribute those resources, and really fundamentally change the culture of our landscapes so that people expected to live in a desert environment, in a place where formerly, this was an agricultural community, and water was abundant thanks to the Salt River Project. And this was a very green, lush area, and our tourism really encouraged that. So there was a big change that had to happen, and that has happened incrementally over decades. So as was mentioned earlier, this has been enormously successful in the city of Phoenix. There's only about 10%, actually less than 10% of residential landscapes are substantially turfed at this point. And I want to note that this was accomplished entirely without rebates to drive those conversions. Instead, this was addressing the culture of our landscapes. But that said, there is still non-functional turf here in the Phoenix area, certainly. And funding that's provided through WIFA could be really important to getting at that last turf that's still out there. So if that funding were to target turf conversion, I would mention two things. One, I'm guessing that most of those residential landscapes that still exist are probably pretty affluent homeowners. It's going to be hard to convince them to change out, and there may be some social equity considerations there. I also want to note that turf in rights-of-ways and medians irrigated with any amount of groundwater has been prohibited in the active management areas since the 1980s. So if you look around the city of Phoenix, you're going to be hard-pressed to find some of that non-functional turf that would be common in other states, perhaps. So my suggestion would be to target HOAs. They often can't afford to change out large amounts of turf or upgrade their irrigation systems. And I know the city of Phoenix is working very closely with HOAs now to assist them in becoming more efficient. Funding could help with that. There may still be some room in municipal parks, golf courses, and municipal facilities. I think Phoenix has done a lot of work to address this over the years, but where there may still be opportunities, funding could make that happen faster. Private turf facilities, particularly those that came in before there were restrictions on the amount of turf that you can have under the management plans, could be a good opportunity to work with them. And then commercial, institutional, and industrial properties. So rebates are staff intensive. And it can be hard to get at those residential properties, but I think if you go for those larger opportunities, that could be a manageable approach for a large city. And I would note too that as you're establishing these more efficient landscapes, another opportunity would be to help proliferate more smart irrigation technologies, upgrading those irrigation systems, putting in controllers that will adjust for weather and also communicate the amount of water that is being used in the landscape. So if you have excessive amounts of water use, that's quickly identified and you can track down leaks, which are also a big issue in the landscape. And I'll pass it over to JC.
JC, before you start your answer, we now have heard several panelists mention the word non-functional turf, and I know this is absolutely your bailiwick in Southern Nevada. So if you're going to describe a little bit about non-functional turf, can you tell us a little bit about what is the definition of non-functional turf, and how would that benefit Phoenix in terms of its removal? What does the removal of non-functional turf do for a city?
Well, first of all, thanks for the kind words, all of you, about Southern Nevada, but we're not special or particularly innovative. We just have the smallest margin for error. I mean, we have by a lot the smallest allocation of Colorado River water in the system. It's not going to change. Nobody's going to give up some of theirs so that we can get more. Represents 90% of our supply. So we have to make do with what we have, which is the only reason that we have been as aggressive as we have been in these areas. I mean, we got as far as we could reasonably get with purely voluntary efforts and with incentives, and now we're into the hard stuff. All the low-hanging fruit is gone, and we're up in the tree now. So first of all, let me thank Carol for leaving absolutely no crumbs on the table at all. So she got them all. But I'm going to emphasize a couple that jump out at me. Let me answer the non-functional turf question. Colloquially, I say that if the only person who ever walks on the grass is pushing a mower, that's non-functional turf. Right? I mean, we actually had an advisory committee with representatives from every sector go through and build the definitions, and they agreed unanimously on what the criteria were for non-functional turf, which if anybody's interested, you can find on our website, their whole report. I mean, it's hard to get people to agree on a lunch order these days. And everybody from every sector went, yeah, okay, that's fair. That's non-functional turf. So if it doesn't pass the swing set test, if you wouldn't let your kids or your grandkids play on a swing set on that turf because it's in the middle of a street, or it's 4 feet wide and next to 3 lanes of traffic or something like that, that's non-functional turf. I mean, so there are a whole lot of criteria that go into it in terms of spatial dimensions and utilization and all that kind of stuff. But it really just comes down to a common sense metric of what is functional and what is purely ornamental. And so, like Carol, I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to presume what Phoenix should do if they get pennies from heaven. I know that we are looking at getting our own pennies from that same source, and I'm already working on plans of how we would use it. I don't think that Phoenix gets nearly as much credit as it deserves, and maybe it's because it doesn't have a sexy dateline, Las Vegas, right? So people love to look at Vegas in both good and bad ways. But Phoenix has done tremendous work in terms of water efficiency. So, but like us, you're like, okay, now most of the low-hanging fruit is gone. Now what do we do, right? And so I agree that most of your residential properties probably don't have non-functional turf anymore. Ours don't either. Most of our single-family residential has come out, and even though our new restriction, which is a law we got passed through the legislature, requiring the removal of non-functional turf by 2026, even though that excludes single-family residential, because there's only so many enemies you want to fight at once. Our participation in the single family program tripled because as here, the general public gets it. It's really some very specific demographic groups that refuse to accept the reality, but residents, by and large, do. The one thing that I want to emphasize, where Carol brought it up, but we've taken some fairly aggressive steps in this, is evaporative cooling. So evaporative cooling in southern Nevada represents a significant use of our water supply. We think in the neighborhood of 10% of all of our consumptive use is for industrial scale. I'm not talking about swamp coolers on trailers. Or in garages. I'm talking about giant warehouses, and that is the fastest growing sector in our economy, that are all swamp cooled. And you can take one 250,000 square foot warehouse and it uses as much water in a year as 1,500 dry-cooled commercial centers. And so I'll talk a little later. There's another opportunity to talk about economic decisions and who we want to attract and who we don't. But I think that evaporative cooling is a huge opportunity, but it's expensive to replace. So we have an incentive program and have had for a while, not very many takers. And when I reached out to the engineers and the architects and said, okay, why are you not interested in doing this? It was because the actual costs have gone up so much for replacing a wet-cooled system with a dry-cooled system. So I, this year, changed the terms of our program to make it much more generous. And then we got pennies from heaven from the county, and it allowed us to go up to $1,500 a ton of incentives. So that covers a full 50% of the out-the-door installed cost. So now we're starting to get some takers. But it's a long journey, and if you have an opportunity to throw some money at it, it is definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough nut to crack, that one.
And I think Grady had a comment on this.
I didn't have any non-functional turf at my house, but I had functional turf in my backyard. I had about 2,000 square feet of it. I replaced it a month ago with artificial turf. I resisted that for a long time. I thought it was too shiny. It looked like plastic. It's awesome. It's great. My grandkids love it. We played on it yesterday. It's very expensive. It cost me a lot to do that. But anyone who's resistant, try it. If you can afford it and you want it, it's much better. I think we ought to consider perhaps prohibiting winter lawns. I am shocked when I drive around my neighborhood at how many people still plant winter rye and set their timer to go off 6 times a day to get the seeds to germinate. Okay, it looks pretty when it's nice and green, but particularly in front yards, which maybe don't meet the definition of non-functional turf, but the truth is are not really used very much, we ought to stop. So I generally agree with the Phoenix approach of carrots, not sticks. I generally agree with education. So in the interest of education, let me just say to all of you watching this now or in the future, stop overseeding winter lawns.
I would like to please pile on top, and that is to say, we drilled down into how much water a yard uses when there's an overseeded lawn. And by the way, you know, that brown look, it's seasonal. Like if you let your Bermuda go brown, it feels like you live in a place that has winter, so I'm all for it. But when we drill down, it's a lawn that's watered during the summer and then overseeded in the winter is the same as a body of water. It uses, so when I see grass and especially overseeded turf, I see a body of water, and I know that an enormous amount of water is evaporating off, you know, per square foot every single day. So it is really hard to justify.
Yeah, can I just throw one more that Grady prompted in my mind? Artificial turf. Interestingly, school systems love artificial turf. The turf quality and the safety is actually better, but it's expensive for them to do, right? So we've incentivized every high school football field in southern Nevada through the school district to be converted to artificial turf. UNLV is just finishing up their projects, and now we are working on their baseball, soccer, softball fields as well. So that's another really good utilization of found money, if you will, because those are perpetual savings. But the cost per square foot of artificial turf is generally prohibitive for schools and those kind of places. So, I mean, as much money as I can get, I can use it on converting public sector, private schools, universities, all of those athletic fields.
So these are all great ideas, and we're gonna get some more questions coming up here about other conservation programs in terms of retrofit. But I want to turn really quickly to looking at the issue of growth, and so I'm going to ask Terry and Grady this question of how can Phoenix address water conservation in the context of additional development, new development?
In what order?
Grady started that.
So I worry that there is a tendency as we look at the water situation to think, well, we just have to stop growing. That's the way to deal with the problem, is let's just not grow anymore. That, frankly, I think is a bad idea. Now, I make my living from real estate, so, you know, take that for what it's worth, but I think it's very difficult for a city to choose not to grow. And the history of Phoenix has been to choose to grow. We have defined ourselves by growth. I don't think we can turn that around, and I don't think we should turn that around. And I think growing at a more slow pace might be a good idea occasionally, but that happens anyway because of the ebbs and flows of the real estate market. It is just in a nation that believes in a constitutional right to travel and the institution of private property, I don't think we can decide, let's just not grow anymore. We're going to keep growing. It's too attractive to come here. And the reality is that the incremental amount of water use from that, I mean, you already heard the statistics about how much is used by existing urban populations. Newer urban populations use even less per capita because the lots are smaller. So that's one piece of how we should grow, is we should become more dense. That is not popular with some homeowners and neighbors in certain areas, but we should become more dense. We should have relatively explicit limits, I think, in new subdivisions about things like non-functional turf, or even perhaps front yard turf. Just don't have it anymore. Most people are not already. I do want to caution city councils against throwing ad hoc stipulations in zoning cases about your subdivision can't have any swimming pools. Your subdivision can't have any turf at all. That's not the way to do it because that comes too late in the development process. It takes people by surprise. If you want to do something, make it more programmatic, make it more of an overall kind of limitation, not an ad hoc limitation on individual project approvals. And the last thing I would say is, and this will not be popular with city councilmen, but the number one way you can manage urban water use is through rates. Make water more expensive. That is the last thing city councils want to do because it gets people the most riled up. And you have to be careful in how you do it. Glennon's article also had this in it. You want to make the amount of water to sustain a family relatively inexpensive. But as incrementally houses use more and more water because they're using a lot of it on landscape, rather than decide how much landscape you get, like putting a square footage limitation on it, make the water more expensive. Phoenix has, even after the rate increases the last time around that were very controversial, Phoenix still has unbelievably cheap water. And I think in the face of the relentless publicity about the decline of water in Powell and Meade, the bathtub ring and the lakes, this is an opportune time to raise rates. So I see two city councilmen in the audience who are looking at me like I've lost my mind. I really think you ought to take advantage of this time and raise water rates.
Well, let me thank Grady for taking that point. and touch on a couple of others. I've already mentioned that I think we need to have a gallons per new employee scenario. In other words, that there needs to be a spreadsheet that basically evaluates new industry in terms of how wasteful or conserving they are, and in addition to what's already been described in terms of encouraging them to be more conserving. We've got in many parts of Maricopa County now and in Pima County a phenomenon which has taken hold, unfortunately, which results in a lot of what I would consider single-family home subdivisions, but they're rental. And they don't come under the groundwater code, so that they're not required to have a 100-year supply, although they use just as much water as a normal owner-occupied subdivision. That's got to be fixed, and that's a legislative matter, but I think it's out there, and the cities need to get together and make sure that we don't make further demands upon our critical groundwater. That's the reason we have a Central Arizona project. I mean, I remember seeing in Congress the pictures of Pinal County primarily, but also Pima and parts of Maricopa with the subsidence because of the extraordinary amounts of water that's being pumped out from underground. We've done a great job within the AMAs of stopping that, and there is zero withdrawal, and there are new recharges that have basically taken that problem, at least for now, off the table. But it's just in the AMAs, and now we've read about parts of Butler Valley, parts of Cochise County, the entire Verde Valley that are being overpumped, and many of the supplies, because there are no restrictions there. And as probably you've seen in the news, there's a foreign-owned agricultural interest which has the opportunity to put just huge amounts of water on their alfalfa because there is no restriction and it comes free out of the ground. Let's all get together and try to make sure that the same restrictions that have caused water conservation in the center of Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima County and parts of Yavapai exist in the rest of the state, because we're killing our birthright here in terms of future water for future economic growth. And I just think that ought to be made very forcefully at the legislature, and city councils can't do it by themselves, but altogether you are a very powerful voice to make sure that happens. So go after the rental subdivisions, make sure that we have a schedule of what groups can be brought in at the least impact on our water, and then take as the new reality that this really is a zero-sum game. If water goes to a new group, it's got to come from somewhere else, and it may come from conservation, it may come from direct potable recharge, it may come from lots of the rearrangements that we've talked about, but it needs to be identified as it hasn't been before. And of course, the cities within the AMA have to do that for their groundwater, but it seems to me that needs to be more generally applicable. Thank you.
Warren.
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to just add, I think one of the things that at AMWA we have been talking about with our members and what I have been sharing, particularly with our board of directors, is this time of uncertainty that is around the Colorado River, and knowing that we're going to have significantly less Colorado River water in our future. This is the time to make extra wise and extra smart decisions among the cities. And this is the time to be pulling in your water managers, your water resource advisors in all kinds of conversations that occur at the city level, whether it be with parks and recs to especially with economic development. Because as some of the points made, if residents are looking at they're needing to do more and they're wanting to make more efforts to use water efficiently, they want to be sure and see that the city is doing the same thing. And that particularly is felt a lot with the industries and businesses that are brought in. And so as President Goddard points out, it's really important to make sure that the water, that when you bring an industry in, you're going to be able that they're sustainable, that they're low water using industries. We should be bringing in businesses and industries that are supporting our effort here in the Valley to be sustainable when it comes to water. And so that's really important. And I know Phoenix is doing a real good job of identifying that. And then particularly with this couple of new developments that are coming in the north part of Phoenix, where there's the planning requirements and such of what is required there for single family. But again, it's at all levels, and that's why it's so important that we make extra wise, extra smart decisions right now in this time of uncertainty.
Thanks, Warren. I think, JC, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, if I can, because I've been hip deep in this for a while, right? And you're right, as you increase rates and as you ratchet up restrictions on your existing population, they are going to become more and more resentful of growth. And we know that you can't stop growth without economic consequences, right? And people don't necessarily do that math, but it doesn't make it less real. And so we've changed our focus on how do we minimize the water footprint of new development. Single family is actually pretty easy, right? You tell them where they can and can't have turf. In fact, we recently enacted a rule that doesn't allow even turf in the backyard of new residential development. And that seems pretty harsh because it is. But people are going to come here for if Phoenix is anything like Las Vegas, right? They're evacuating California now. And so everybody wants to come here, and you just say, well, if you want to live here, that's fine, but this is this environment, and here are the rules. And you can self-select and go somewhere else, and that will actually have some effect on the growth rate if to the extent people say, I don't want to live there if I can't have grass. But single family is easy. The industrial, commercial sectors are more complicated. But we unexpectedly got a call from the economic development officials, the whole community, and said, you guys have never really been involved in these kind of decisions, but we would like you to be. And so in response, I have developed, I've done the version 1.0, and I'm working on a more complex version, built a calculator, as you would call it, called the Water Investment Rating. And it doesn't need that many inputs. And when you run a prospective business through the calculator, it will tell you, is this a terrible use of our community's water resources or a great use of our community's water resources, based on a combination of their consumptive water footprint and their economic output, right? And then there are other factors that you can include. Is there a strong societal benefit to this type of business? So for instance, if you're underserved from a medical facility standpoint, you might get bonus points for that. But what's interesting is, as we've discovered, and we've run existing businesses through the calculator just to tighten it up and make it work right, is that the same business built differently, conceived differently, has a wildly different water investment rating. And so my favorite case in point, because I was just there last week, is there's a new data center coming to Nevada. And they are completely waterless. Now, you're doing all of these things with your existing residents and your existing businesses. One really big data center can ruin your whole day. That can be 300-400 million gallons of water a year just for the evaporative cooling. These folks are operating, and I went to see their data center in Utah. They are completely waterless, and interestingly, they did it in a way that didn't increase their energy footprint, which is what they all worry about. And so you can develop sustainably, you just have to do it in a different way. But so many of the engineers and the architects and all of the other folks that do this have been using the Save As button for so long that they have templates, basically, and that's how they want to build. And as municipalities, if we want to balance economic development and water stewardship, we kind of have to compel them to do things differently. And they're remarkably responsive once you just tell them this is how it's going to be.
I want to tag on to, both Terry and JC have now talked about this notion of a calculator, a matrix for cities to evaluate. I think that's a great idea. And it also goes back to my concern about too often a city council sort of knee-jerking a reaction about a water use. I had an occasion a couple of years ago where a city in the valley was considering relocating a beverage, locating in that city a beverage plant. Now this is expensive beverage. It's not alcoholic, but it's expensive, and it would use a lot of water. And the mayor of that community had a knee-jerk reaction as, well, we don't have enough water, we can't do that. Well, that's to me an example of not sort of thinking through the different choices about what you do with the water you have. This was water that was going to be put in a container and consumed by human beings. It was water to be drunk in a very expensive fashion with some additives, not alcoholic additives, but expensive additives. But that's not a misuse of water, all right, in terms of its impact. And that's why I think it is imperative for cities that want to engage in this kind of deliberate choice making about how you use water to further economic growth and jobs, to do it in a systematic way that water professionals like JC and Carol and others look at and systematize, not just knee-jerk react.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to follow in on Grady's fancy water, I guess you have to prohibit people from leaving the state if they're drinking the fancy water to make your point complete. So there may be a freedom of movement issue here. I just want to put in a pitch for Arizona iced tea, which is bottled in New York. Drink as much as you can.
I'd like to just add that the city of Chandler has provided an example of taking on board that calculation. The city of Chandler passed an ordinance in 2017 prohibiting new high-volume commercial users that weren't consistent with the city's plan for economic development. And that isn't necessarily the way every city needs to approach this, but here's an example of a local city that has found its own homegrown way to think about growth and their water portfolio.
That's their large water user ordinance.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've had a lot of great ideas about development. We talked a little bit about non-functional turf. I don't want to get away from a conservation conversation, especially about different kinds of programs, without at least talking a little bit about indoor and outdoor and what the difference between the two is. So Sarah and Warren, I'm asking you this question. Can you describe some examples just of different types of conservation programs that address indoor water use of water versus outdoor water use? And what are the relative benefits and effectiveness of indoor water conservation and these outdoor water conservation methods that we've seen? Go first.
Sure, thank you. Well, first off, any type of conservation, whether it's indoor or outdoors, is good. We want to encourage everyone to be looking at ways that they can use water more efficiently, or more importantly, to actually use less water. We have seen over the last couple of decades a lot of technological improvements on indoor water use. That doesn't require us to change our behavior. And that's everything from low flush toilets to low water use, washing machines, dishwashers, shower heads. All of those things have really helped to reduce indoor water use, and especially as there's been new development. Now, in older stock homes, there is still plenty of room for retrofit opportunities to bring in those low efficient water use devices. The important thing, whether you have a new home or an old home or whatever type of indoor water devices you have, is to always be checking for leaks. Leaks can use so much more water than anyone realizes, especially toilets, leaky toilets. You got to keep an eye on those. So checking for leaks is always a good thing to do. Now, as already been mentioned, outdoor water is something that we can continue to improve on when it comes to conservation. We use a lot of water outdoors here in the valley, anywhere from 50 to 70%. We have seen mature, but advancing and just increase awareness about. It's just surprising how that can be a challenge. We really should be encouraging watering no more than twice a week, and even less at times like this in the winter or in the monsoon season. Phoenix and other cities, at the AMWA cities, have solid water conservation programs. And we really need to increase awareness about those programs and get residents and businesses to take advantage of the incentives, materials, and classes that are offered by the cities. And just a real quick plug, at AMWA, we have on our website very detailed information about indoor and outdoor water use that can provide you with a lot of really good information. So I encourage you to check amwa.org.
And Sarah, if there's even a crumb of a crumb left on the table.
Believe it or not, I'm able to add to that. Most of us don't have an unlimited budget to invest in water conservation as businesses or as residents. 93% of the water that is flushed or goes down the drain is recycled. And about 70% of the water of your average residence, 50 to 70%, is used outside. So if you have to make a choice of investments, do I convert my outside landscaping, or do I replace all my plumbing fixtures or buy a new washing machine? Choose to reduce the amount of water that you're applying outside. That is the big win for water conservation. It is the best thing that you can do for your city. Beyond that, when we're thinking about how do we reduce our landscaping outside, we need to keep in mind that Phoenix is a very hot place, and that plants are the best outdoor air conditioners that exist. So when we're talking about xeriscaping, and it's Z-E-R-I-S, it's X-E-R-I-S, not Z-E-R-O-S. We don't mean getting rid of all landscaping. We mean replacing high water use landscaping with low water use landscaping that will still provide that important environmental benefit of cooling the city and providing habitat for pollinators and other animals. Beyond that, I'm really excited about the technology that enables individual homeowners or water users to be alerted when they have leaks. I heard from one of the water people at the City of Surprise that they installed the smart metering, and there's an opt-in for ratepayers to be alerted on their smartphones if there's a leak. And in the first 9 months, they detected 7,300 leaks. So an enormous amount of water that after the hookup, when it gets to the residents, is being lost through leaks that homeowners aren't aware of. Those are mostly outdoors. And there is a big opportunity there's a device that you can buy that you install at home that will alert you if there's an unusual amount of water that's being used from one of your water outlets. And that's a way that we as residents can be aware of our water usage and really reduce it. I also want to just say AMWA and the City of Phoenix websites have valuable resources for how you can make a start to reduce your outdoor landscaping and conserve water.
All right, I'm going to pivot a little bit here to a question about Phoenix is looking right now very strongly at direct potable reuse, also known as advanced water purification, as a way to recycle and increase the supplies for its customers. I think, President Goddard, you called Met's efforts in that regard new water. So we'll look at that the same way and say it's new water for Phoenix. But I'm asking Carol and Sarah, what are the benefits of this technology and the challenges to implementation? And Carol, you want to try first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So direct potable reuse is one of our quickest ways to augment potable supplies. I think many of you will know that Arizona has been implementing indirect potable reuse for many, many years. And that's when you're reclaiming wastewater, treating it to a very high degree, recharging the aquifer, and then later pulling it out again, treating it and delivering it. So this has served us really well in central Arizona for a very long period of time. It made sense. We had plenty of CAP supplies. We could take that reclaimed water, we could store it for later when we needed it. We are to the point now where our CAP supplies are going to be reduced, and we're going to need to make the best use of all the supplies available to us. Now, indirect recharge and then pulling that water out again, treating it again, that's energy intensive, it's very expensive. We have the technology now, and it's proven. We also have the permitting capacity. We can treat that water and deliver it directly to customers more cost effectively and backfilling some of those surface water supplies that will be reduced. So it just makes practical sense to do this. I'd say the biggest barrier to use is often thought of as the public's fear of direct potable reuse. Treating that water and then supplying it directly to them. The media jumps up and down and says, toilet to tap, and the expectation is that our residents are going to panic about this. I don't really think that's the case. I think we have such a long history of indirect potable reuse here. People are accustomed to it. They're familiar with it. This is that next step. We've seen a number of projects introducing people to the idea of direct potable reuse. They've been very successful. I think the biggest barrier to implementing direct potable reuse is probably our concern as water professionals that the public is going to push back. We fear that blowback. And my advice would be lean in, embrace it. We know as water professionals that this water is absolutely safe to drink. It's safer than what you're going to pull up out of the ground most times. You're still going to have to treat water. So deliver it with confidence, and I think that the public will receive it well.
And I would just add, if we think about reducing outdoor water use and then maximizing reuse of water, think how powerful that is, how much money that can save cities in delaying the time when cities need to go out and find new water supplies. I agree with Carol that the water community, I think, is a lot more nervous about the public reception of DPR. Universities can help. There's an ongoing research effort at ASU to gauge community responses to direct potable reuse, and preliminary results are that people, when they're walked through the process, understand that it makes perfect sense. So we're already drinking the reused water that the Las Vegas area sends down the CAP. So, you know, we've made a small start. And we can see cities like San Diego and the communities in Orange County that are already doing DPR. So we have lots of examples, but direct potable reuse combined with reducing outside water use these are the two most powerful tools that cities have to make our way to this hotter, drier future that we're facing.
President Goddard?
A little rebuttal here. The water from the Central Arizona Project is the purest you're going to get. I don't know what this comment about waste from Las Vegas is really, but please don't think about that. I do think we're talking a lot about changes of attitude, changes of perception. One of them that I run into a lot is I say some rash things, as I did today, about certain fountains out in the desert and golf courses. And the answer always is, well, that's recycled water, so it doesn't count. Well, yes, it does. It's all water. Direct potable reuse simply reinforces the fact that we don't have a drop to waste. And frankly, it's all got to be thought of. There is no separate category anymore that is recycled water, somehow not good to drink. And I think that we've got to make that transition very quickly. So just one other point about the point of view.
Warren.
Yeah, just to add real quick and just to echo, I think direct potable reuse really needs to be looked at as a new supply augmentation. I'm not sure if it fits Grady's definition, but it's still, I think, I view it as more important for cities to be looking at right now rather than desalination. Not to say desalination shouldn't be looked at, but it's going to take too long. Desalination is going to take a long time to bring it about, whereas DPR or direct potable reuse or enhanced water treatment, this recycling of our water is so important in both the near term as well as for our long term. And it's something that the cities are seriously looking at. A number of the AMWA cities are looking at, and I certainly applaud Phoenix's efforts to look at a regional direct potable reuse project that could benefit this valley.
If I could just say, I agree with all of that. I think it is great. I think we should do more direct potable reuse, but it's not new water. It's not, I mean, by definition, it is not new water. Yeah, it has been used, and reusing it can make our use more efficient. It can lower the what we call the GPCD, the gallons per capita per day people, but it's not a new bucket of water. So to the extent we want to seriously talk about augmentation, reuse of cleaned up effluent is not augmentation.
And is WIFA funds available for direct potable reuse?
That's and just in case you didn't hear it, President Goddard had asked the question if WIFA funds were available for direct potable reuse. It depends. A number of legislators have mentioned it, at least to me, that it could be. But I think there's a real question of that, as whether or not that will be. I know there's some federal funding also that's involved.
The other thing
as well.
I think we need to keep in mind is, and I think Carol or Sarah, one or the other of you said earlier, that 93% of our effluent is reused. It's not like we're throwing it out in the ocean like they do in California. We are using it to recharge aquifers. We're using it to cool the Palo Verde nuclear generating station. We actually have one of the highest percentages in the world of reuse. It's not direct, and direct can be more efficient and is a good thing to do, but it's not like we're wasting all that water currently.
This is just, it's a conversation about upcycling. We're upcycling our reuse when we go to direct potable reuse.
You mean like a higher beneficial use?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. No.
Making sure that it's making sure there's that tool is available to the cities, and so taking advantage of that provides one more way to show how Arizona has always been putting to beneficial use its recycled water.
I actually want to change the subject because I don't want us to end this.
You want to stand here?
Actually, yes, I do, but I'll try not to. I don't want to end this conversation without going back to the agriculture urban issue. Because I think that is the single biggest thing that we need to face up to. The Western United States was settled by reclamation, which meant let's give people a lot of water and build some big projects and get them to move out there and farm in an area where you can't farm unless you have irrigation. Phoenix is a huge recipient of that. And the sort of section line, full section building blocks of Phoenix went from farms to subdivisions, starting in the 1950s up until today, largely. And as we did that, each one of those sections, the water use went down by 60 to 70%. Subdivisions use less water than farming. That has been the secret of this city's success. but we're pretty much at the end of that. And that's what we have to face up to. We have reached a point at which we have maximized that immediate conversion of agriculture. Now, there's still Pinal County, which is its own mess of water use, where we are currently, because of the way our laws work, we are incentivizing farming and discouraging subdivisions. Even though subdivisions would use less water and create more economic benefit, that's how our system works. But the reality of where we are today and the problem we really face is we have to start realizing that the conversion of agriculture to urban use is no longer in the same neighborhood. We now face the problems that California has faced for a long time, where farming is on the river and people live on the coast. Well, we now need more of the water that is on the river to come here. The CAP Canal is going to have plenty of extra room to do that. We may need to take, as Terry mentioned earlier, groundwater from remote basins in central Arizona and move it through the CAP Canal to get it here. But all of this requires rethinking the basic priorities that shaped the West, which was we want farming and we prefer farming, and if it turns into people later on, great. We now need to have a system that begins to develop a priority for urban use over farming use. And we're seeing the little embryos of that. There are offers on the river from farmers to not plant for a given year and to sell that water to cities. The cities currently think the price is too high and that buying it a year at a time isn't the right way to go. Good points. But that is the beginning of a negotiation that needs to take place about the future of what happens with Colorado River water, which is today's subject. Does it continue to be used primarily for farming on the river, or does it move slowly, carefully, trying to protect agricultural economies? Does more of it move to central Arizona? And we're seeing that play out right now and over the next decade or two.
I think Sarah had a point she wanted to make there.
So without any specific water restrictions outside of the Groundwater Management Act, the CAP service area in the last 20 years grew, the population grew 44% and the water demand grew 14%. Which is to say that we can grow populations of cities and we can grow economies without a commensurate increase in water demand. Water demand and population and economic growth have been largely decoupled. So I don't frame the agricultural versus urban conversation the same way. I don't think without doubt there will be less water available for agriculture. And that's in some really important places. Imperial Valley, Yuma, very good places to grow food because they're hot and dry and they have a river. And we're going to have impacts when there's less water available to grow food in Imperial Valley and Yuma. We'll see the impact in what we pay for food. But we shouldn't be looking at solving the urban water problem as either agriculture or urban, because we need to keep in mind we're very good at growing cities and economies without needing a lot more water to do that. There may be room for some additional transfers, but that's not what this question is about here.
All right. All right. Well, go ahead.
I disagree with that one. I agree we need to preserve agriculture. I think it is important to preserve agriculture for a bunch of reasons. We eat, and it is our heritage, and Phoenix is a farming town, but there is a collision that is happening. We can't have it all. We have to both cut urban use, which we've done a really good job of, but we have to cut agricultural use as well. And how we do that, how we make that transition, the important thing that I agree with Sarah on is we have to do it in a way that doesn't decimate agriculture, but we also have to do it with the recognition that there isn't enough water to do everything we've been doing.
And I don't disagree that agriculture is going to have to use less water. We can't get to the we need to save 20 to 40%, something like that, of the water that we're used to using from the Colorado River. It's going to be very difficult to get there. We can't get there without agriculture. I'm simply saying that we don't want to frame this as we can't have future cities, we can't have growth, unless we take water from ag. That's what I push back on.
President Goddard had a comment?
Yeah, there are a couple of things dancing around here, and we started off by saying that 70% of the Arizona water is used by agriculture, and it isn't all the same. You have some marginal use, which produces a marginal profit, and you have some areas, Yuma Valley being the most extreme, that is perhaps the best example of high production farming in the country, if not the world. They change their 4 crops a year or more with astonishing efficiency. And they do, in fact, produce an extraordinary amount of the foodstuffs that we eat. But I don't eat a lot of alfalfa. I don't know about the rest of you. But there is a lot of Arizona water that is going to grow cattle feed that is exported to other countries. I think that is marginally profitable. It's water that could be, my concept here, and I think we need to look into it carefully, is one size does not fit all. 1 gallon of water is not the same value for every agricultural purpose. So in Yuma Valley, it's really valuable. Yuma Mesa, not so much. Mojave County, for alfalfa, probably not so much at all. So let's look at that instead of saying, well, it's going to be X number of dollars per acre foot. Let's look at what the actual marginal profit from that water is and think seriously about some of it moving through the CAP canal, through the SRP canals, to municipal needs. It's not a massive, it's not a question of drying up ag to support the cities. We can have both. 80% almost of Arizona agriculture is flood irrigated. I'm sorry, that's not the most efficient way to grow crops. And so part of this incredible federal largesse that seems to be coming our way could easily go to improving the efficiency of Arizona agriculture.
And I just want to follow up there with you, President Goddard. So one of the things that we've been talking about today in terms of municipal conservation is we're telling people who live in cities, we're telling our customers that they need to make priority choices about how they use water. And we want them to, as my little sticker says, use water wisely. But I guess my question is to you is I hear what you're saying, and I think what I hear you saying is that we should ask agriculture to make the same kind of priority choices, that not all water use is equal, and that we need to start, even if it is a profit, we need to think about whether it's wise in the context of a declining Colorado River Basin for agriculture to have an unlimited use for unlimited crops for unlimited purposes.
Beautifully put. I think we all have to come to the table. One of the reasons the CAP is called, and I know AMWA is supportive of this, is we need all the stakeholders in Arizona to come to the table, talk seriously. We did this when the Groundwater Management Act was originally conceived in the late 1970s. This is the time to do it again, because we can't continue on the track we're on. When Interior tells us that we have to save between 2 and 4 million acre feet, mostly in the lower basin, it's not going to come out of the cities. The cities could go dry, and you still wouldn't save 2 to 4 million acre feet. So the point now is, unless agriculture is at the table and willing to make some very serious, I don't want to say concessions, it simply is a change in the reality that they're dealing with in order to continue agriculture in Arizona and in Southern California. That's the mission. And none of us profit from having the river go dry. Excuse me, that interrupts agriculture even more than it does cities. Phoenix has multiple sources of water in an emergency. Phoenix doesn't stop its whole operation, but a farm will if in fact the worst happens and the Colorado River ceases to flow. I think there's a lack of understanding that is in fact the reality that we're looking at here. When you talk about Deadpool in Lake Powell and at Lake Mead, that means the river is not flowing. There's a small amount of inflow along the way from the Little Colorado, for example, but it's very small. And it's not a future any of us, and especially the farmers, cannot face. So let's sit down now, before the river is dry, and figure out a way to keep that from happening. I believe it's possible, but it's going to take everybody at the table. It's going to take the federal government taking a much larger view than they have taken so far. They've been thundering in the background, but they have yet to present a plan that would allow for the saving of Lake Mead and Lake Powell. They seem to want the states to do it ourselves. So far, the states have been incapable of coming to the table and coming up with the kind of reductions that are necessary to keep the river flowing. The feds need to be part of that process.
And I think Warren wanted a comment. I have time for one comment more.
Well, I was just going to echo and say, agree with President Goddard's comments there. I think it's really important that as we are all looking at a river go potentially dry, that we do all that we can. All users of all sectors in all states have to work together on this Colorado River crisis. It is too important. We need to make sure we have a river in our future that will continue to benefit all of us. And just as cities are looking at making tough decisions about what type of growth we should be having, what kind of industries we should bring in, how can we reduce our water consumption, agriculture needs to have a tough discussion about what crops they are going to grow in a future with less water. And so I think clearly, the last thing we want to do is to pitch this as a cities versus agriculture, because that's not the case. We're all in this together, but yet we really need agriculture to be open to these conversations, looking at partnerships that are possible with cities, and that we're working together to reduce water use, or we could very likely find ourselves with a river that doesn't benefit any of us.
Well said, well said. Well, I'm going to invite city council members if they have any questions or comments, but before we do that, I just want to thank these panelists that we've had an extremely stimulating conversation here, very in-depth. It sounds to me like really what we need. I like what Warren said at the end in terms of we're all in this together. Collaboration between people who live in cities and farms, things that people can do in their homes. We've talked a lot about that. And, it's one of those things, you talk about the things you can control. We know that as people who all live in cities, we have control over our own water use, and we need to make sure that we're doing that, is what I've heard. And then we need to encourage others to be at the table as well with us. So before I invite the city council members, if they have a question or comment, I just want you to thank our panelists, if you would. Excellent discussion. So with that, I know Councilwoman Guardado, if you are here, if you have any questions or comments, please come on up to the podium.
So my question continued to change as the conversation continued to evolve. So I'm gonna read this just because I'm like, oh, maybe I should ask this, maybe I should ask that. Well, thank you guys so much. God knows that I've learned a lot today in terms of what everyone has to say, and I love the conversation. I love the passion that you guys have for this, and I think we're in great hands having all of you guys as mentors and as people that we can look to making sure that we figure out how is it that we're gonna solve this issue. So my question, I guess now is directed to all of you, and see who can answer it, and see what you guys think about this. Just hearing the conversation, I guess the question is, and as elected officials, oftentimes it is very difficult, like you guys have talked about in this conversation, the burden of resource management, whether that's restricting water use or the rates and fees we place on our users. I appreciate Grady's comments and honesty, but my district is not the Billmore or Kierland, especially in our working class neighborhoods, like those I represent. We have plenty of residents living paycheck to paycheck, and increases can be detrimental to their household budgets. And we still have a huge balance that still needs to be paid from what everyone went through COVID. As a city, we are already struggling with affordability crisis that has contributed to our increase in homelessness. And we see homelessness more and more every single day. How do you guys think we best keep equity at the front of mind when we implement water conservation plans and balance our water rates between residential users and our larger industrial users? I know you guys have talked a lot about that as well, and I also really appreciate that. So how do we do that? How do we balance it out, and how do we make sure that everyone pays their fair share?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit of this earlier. I think the way you do that, and you have to look to your staff to develop the right schedule to do this, but you figure out in your district, for example, how much water do people need to sustain their existing lifestyle? And you continue to make that very affordable. Maybe you don't raise rates there at all. But as use increases, and it's tricky because you don't want to just say we're going to charge rich people a whole lot more. I mean, that won't go over well. But as people use water well beyond what is necessary to sustain an acceptable lifestyle, you make it incrementally more expensive. So it's like progressive tax rates. People who can afford it, if they want to use it to subsidize winter lawns, maybe that's okay if they're charged enough to make up for that. So it's in a rate design that I think that can be accomplished. The other thing I would say is that I think the emphasis that we're seeing at the council level and at the state level now in trying to make housing more affordable is not disconnected from this entire conversation. That smaller units, higher density units, and the sort of affordability of housing can be tailored and partnered with water use decisions to make those particularly good examples of how to efficiently use water.
Thank you. The City of Phoenix has done some outstanding work in addressing this question of ensuring adequate, affordable drinking water. We actually, the Kyle Center for Water Policy produced a report called 10 Tenets of Water Equity that talked about how the City of Phoenix has worked to figure out that important basic need for a single-family residence, and also takes up some other questions of how to make sure that people have access to water. I mean, this is a matter of public health and life in a place like Phoenix. People need to have their water. So I want to sort of acknowledge the outstanding work with tiered water rates, seasonally adjusted rates, so that if you use a lot more water in the summer because you're keeping your pool full or you're having your grass, you pay more per gallon at some point for that water. There's great work being done. And the other thing that Phoenix has done that I think is really interesting is I think still maybe experimenting with not totally shutting off a household for failure to pay their water rates, but instead putting a device on at the hookup that allows for a minimum amount of water that would be needed for public health to still be delivered, that device called a regulator. Anyway, Phoenix has done great work in this area and has provided leadership really for the hot Southwest in this area.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And I guess just a second question, just because I keep hearing you guys talk a lot about, and I understand where this conversation is going, but just in terms of, one of the things that as a city we're working on is all of the heat. If you look at, like, for example, in my district, on a summer day, it's 120 degrees, but where we have trees and we have a lot more grass, it's probably 10, 15 degrees less. And now I hear the conversation, and I know that what we're saying is that we don't want any more grass and that we don't want any more trees. As a city, we have a goal of planting even more trees. So how do we strike that balance where we deal with these heat islands that we have, especially in working class communities, like out in the West Side and out in District 8 and in a lot of other areas? But how do we strike that balance as we're looking at how do we use our water more wisely?
I think it's really important that no one take a message from what we've said today of no more trees. That is not the message. That is absolutely not the message. Trees are better than grass. Replace grass with trees. Trees cool the environment better, they shade better, they use less water on average. So trees are critically important, and I think the rate structure, which we talked about a minute ago, should build into it the expectation that there are some trees outside of houses, because it is really critical to mitigate the heat island. Otherwise, you wind up hotter, makes it harder to live here, and winds up consuming more water over the long run, conceivably. So trees are good. You got to think about the kind of trees, just like you got to think about the kinds of crops. But there are lots of trees that do grow here, and we don't want to discourage those at all.
So in Southern Nevada, we have a program, and I think Phoenix has a similar one, for incentivizing turf removal. We actually have a requirement that at least 50% of the area be covered in canopy, trees, shrubs, etc. And when we went back and looked at that requirement, what we found is we were actually getting more than 100% canopy coverage, which seems irrational. But these trees grow up, and now they're shading the sidewalk and a little bit of the street, and so they have a net benefit. One of the issues that we've had to answer a lot with regard to the new turf restriction on non-functional turf is, well, what about urban heat island effect? And we are actively promoting the installation of trees and shrubs and other types of plant material that improve the heat situation rather than exacerbate it. So it can be done. And yeah, and what we found is that one of the things that we've had to teach people is that magnolia trees don't particularly like it in the desert. And why we have to teach people that, I don't know. But when we install desert appropriate plant material, which thrives better, still offers shade, all of that, what we've found over time, numerous studies, is that we reduce the water footprint of that area by 75%. And it's just as lush, and it cools just as much. It's just not turf. Turf is just not a particularly good cooling mechanism.
That's great.
Turf will grow under the tree.
I just wanted to add that certainly trees and the City of Phoenix's program in trying to plant more trees is positive. Especially, there are a variety of desert-adapted, low water use trees that people can select and can utilize. And the beauty of them is once they're established, they use significantly less water than other types of trees. I just have to remember not to water them as if they were a magnolia. And I do want to still put a plug in for functional turf, and that is where community parks are still we need to remember the value that parks can provide to a community on so many levels. Now, we might not want to overseed in the winter, but still utilizing, looking at areas such as parks that can have turf, and then reducing the non-functional turf in the other parts of the community by replacing with trees and appropriate desert-adapted shrubs is moving the valley further and further along as a more sustainable community to live in.
Well, thank you guys so much. There's a lot of food for thought and a lot of ideas. I know that we're starting to move on some policies, but I think definitely for me, this conversation was very helpful in terms of how we continue to move forward and how we continue to bring you guys into this conversation. Because yes, we are the 5th largest city in the country, but it's going to take a village for us to be able to deal with this. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right, we have just a few minutes. If there's anyone here from the public that would like to ask a question, we have a microphone available over there. I think there's a gentleman here.
The long walk to the mic.
Yes, the long walk to the microphone.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Che Tor. I'm a local realtor here. I have a couple questions. So my first question is, I've been told we have plenty of water under the valley. So how much water does that really sustain us? Say we no longer get water from the Colorado.
So I can I was going to say I can try that with regard to Phoenix. She pointed me. The city of Phoenix has over 3 million acre-feet of groundwater under it. However, we treat groundwater as our last and final resort because groundwater doesn't come back generally on its own. And as President Goddard pointed out early in this conversation, our ability to recharge water into the ground is by definition going to become, I don't want to use the word obsolete, but it will be significantly reduced with that. So yes, there is some water available, but under the Groundwater Management Act, we are very limited about how we can use it. We are also limited in a way, and the limitation relates in a way to making sure that it is a 100-year assured water supply, and that we want to keep. So I hope that helps a little bit. I think Grady has an answer.
I would just add a little bit. We have not done a good job of explaining to the public how we ought to think about groundwater and how we ought to think about the artificially recharged water that we have put under the ground. Both of those are protections against emergencies, and maybe we're in such an emergency. Maybe we should start using probably not the prehistoric groundwater that's underneath Phoenix, but some of the water that we have banked. But most of the public don't understand that we've actually put all this water in the bank. And unless we have a more comprehensive way of explaining how we ought to think about it, when we ought to use it, and it's like a savings account, if we use that water, we're not putting any more in for the foreseeable future. So I think all of that is part of sort of thinking about what is the augmentation that's off at a distant point in time. How much do we have that we can use to get us there? How do we use that? When do we use it? How much other of this kind of interim rearranging we should do? So what I would tell you, and I tell this to real estate people and companies that are thinking of moving here, is don't overreact to the fact that there are terrible bathtub rings on the two lakes. Phoenix has a very diverse, robust water portfolio and can manage its way through a crisis better than I think any other city in the West. That doesn't mean it's not a big issue and something we have to work on. But it's not a reason. I had somebody ask me last week, my wife and I are thinking of moving away because there's no water in Phoenix. And I'll calm down. You don't need to move away. You just need to realize you need to do your part. The rest of us need to do their part. We all need to get together and manage our way through this over the long term.
For perspective to what you just said, Grady, there are parts of the country where cities are trying to figure out how to hold back the sea because of rising sea levels. There are parts of the country that are trying to figure out how to prevent hurricanes. Those are the climate change impacts that we're seeing in different parts of the country. The problem for Phoenix and for Las Vegas is how to have enough water to thrive. I would choose that problem over wrangling hurricanes or holding back rising oceans any day. I'm quite confident that Phoenix and Las Vegas and other southwestern cities will be able to solve this problem. It's the most solvable problem around. It's been being solved for thousands of years.
It's funny you don't have to shovel snow. Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I have a really depressing presentation that I give.
And it talks specifically about we don't get hurricanes and we tend not to get floods and we don't get earthquakes, to speak of. But water scarcity is our natural disaster. And as natural disasters go, it's one of the more manageable ones. So we'd rather be in that position than the ones you're talking about.
Can I say one last thing? Terry talked about are getting a lot of money from the federal government to deal with our water problem. It pales in comparison to what the federal government spends on places that get hurricanes and tornadoes. This is our disaster, but it's a slow-moving, non-critical, not life-threatening disaster, and so it doesn't get the attention. We get a fraction of what is spent on climate problems in other parts of the country. They're there.
Tribes are very much at the table.
Okay.
Yeah, just to kind of, I want to make sure that the audience that listens to this heard his question. He was asking about tribes and at the table, and I think a couple of our panelists immediately chimed in. Tribes are at the table. They're definitely at the table. The collaboration between the tribes in Central Arizona and the cities in Central Arizona is longstanding and very fruitful, and we look forward to continuing those collaborations. So it's there probably will be more to come. There are more opportunities out there and more will be coming, but yeah, no, they're definitely at the table.
Hello, Hunter Basworth, 12 News. I guess in a lot of what we've talked about today, a lot comes down to an educated and informed public. As one of the digital people at our station, I see every time we put out a water-related story, the comments are filled with misinformation or well-meaning but misguided solutions to the issues. In terms of getting the education across with citizens or constituents, what have you, what can Phoenix do or other water entities to kind of get rid of the jargon and kind of cut down to what the water issues are and I guess what's at stake, et cetera?
I'm going to ask Warren to answer that question because this is something that AMWA has been working on recently with Phoenix and other cities.
We have been working hard to coordinate with our members a coordinated messaging when it comes to the Colorado River shortage. And knock on wood, so far it has been working well. We also every week have a blog that we put out the message about water from the municipal perspective, and we're frequently talking about the Colorado River. I encourage you and anyone else to sign up or to look at that blog every week and take advantage of the information that is in there so that the correct information does get out there. But I agree with you, it is a challenge. At this time, when there's a crisis when it comes to the Colorado River, suddenly everyone becomes a conservation expert, and they have all these ideas that need to be done. And it is a challenge for cities to keep the correct message out there. But it is clear that we understand that this is a difficult situation, and yet the cities have been preparing and planning for this day and recognize they know they're going to be living with less Colorado River water in their future and therefore are planning for various scenarios because we're waiting to find out exactly how much water we're going to have in the future, but it's also the possibility that it could be zero. And so cities are having to seriously look at that and prepare for that. But I agree with the other comments. That does not mean it's a time for panic or that suddenly we need to evacuate the city because, as has already been pointed out, moving everybody from the Phoenix area is not going to stop the Colorado River problem. That is, again, why all sectors, all users all states in the Colorado River Basin have to work together on this issue?
You know, it's a great question, and part of our frustration, I think you've sensed already in terms of this panel, that there is no one size fits all. There is no mega answer that we can pull out of the sky and it will fix the problem. For one thing, the problem keeps changing. And until we hear what the next step is in the management of Lake Mead and Lake Powell, we don't know what our water future is. I think the point was made in the very beginning film that a Tier 2A shortage, which has been declared and which we are complying with, does not solve the problem. So there's another shoe to drop. None of us know what the nature of that shoe will be, whether it will be just against the cities, whether it will be a combination of cities and agriculture. There have been some tantalizing words used. Productive use or beneficial use? Beneficial use. We're not sure what they mean by beneficial use. There's one interpretation that could say that there would be significantly greater accommodations made for cities than are made right now. I personally think that's the way it should be interpreted, but Department of Interior has not told us how they plan to interpret it. So there is some insecurity. We need as many outlets as possible, AMWA being the best right now, to say, here are the facts as we know it in many, many different areas, because there is no single water solution. And I think hopefully you can help us convey to people that there's a lot of truth out there. There's some really malicious rumors, and we need to curb the one and encourage the other. And then we need to wait for a shoe to drop, which we still don't know the dimensions of. And that's very frustrating. It's highly unnerving for all of us who care about the future of this state. And I think we will hear within the next year. You cannot keep kicking the can down the road. Colorado River is going dry. Lake Mead is sucking down as we speak. And that's just not a future we can contemplate.
So we're at a little over our time, but before we go, I want to say, and we'll put it on the permanent recording of this on YouTube will be available, but we're going to put on there as well, with the exception, unless Grady tells me something different, every single one of the panelists up here represents an organization that has an online presence that has loads of information. The City of Phoenix has pages and pages of information on water and water conservation. The Central Arizona Water Conservation District, or CAP, has its own website with lots of very useful information. AMWA, the Department of Water Resources, is a wealth. And the Kyle Center has put together an Arizona blueprint for water that is unsurpassed by anyone in terms of the available information about water and water use, not only in Phoenix or the metro areas, but throughout the state of Arizona. And I would be completely remiss with not further complimenting our friends at the Southern Nevada Water Authority, who put together, if not the most useful informational messages, certainly the most entertaining. If you've never seen some of their videos on non-functional turf, you have to check them out, Google SNWA on YouTube or whatever, because you will find some really fun videos that are just engaging for anybody to watch. So I would say with that, I want to thank our panel and thank you all for coming today. It was really useful and provocative information that we needed to get to the public. And so we thank you again. Thank you for panelists.